I think it's a unanimous agreement amongst the community when I say that Nova is probably one of the strongest Warframes in the entire game right now, and there is nothing that she can't do. I mean, even calling her a jack of all trades is doing her injustice. Yeah, she's that powerful. Oh, and before I get into the guide, please consider subscribing because it does help me out a lot. So a lot of people consider Nova to be one of the best frames in the game. But why do I consider her to be in such a high rank? Well, she has S tier survivability with the use of damage reduction and crowd control. She is an amazing weapons platform Warframe. Any gun on her can do a ridiculous amount of damage. With recent changes, her nuke potential now is S tier. Her crowd control, as I mentioned before, is probably in a league of its own. I would say she probably has the best crowd control in the entire game. The benefits that she brings to the team are also very, very good. And most importantly, she is a very enjoyable Warframe. And her enjoyment level for me is S tier. Saying all that, there's probably a lot of S tier Warframes in the game from what people think. But what differentiates her from the crowd? Well, other than being one of the smirkiest proto frames in the entire game, she is one of the ultimate comfort frames. Now, what is a comfort frame? A frame that you can play where you don't have to worry about anything and you can just run around and kill. If you know anything about me, or if it's your first time here, I'm a lazy ass. Yeah, that's me. And that's why I always choose comfort over anything else. Nova is quite literally unkillable. She is one of the only frames that can have 4 layers of damage reduction if she wants. Now, how does damage reduction actually work? If you're a new player or someone who just hasn't bothered looking into how it works, I'll explain it here with math. Let's say you have 1 layer of damage reduction and this damage reduction is 90%. This can be converted into you taking 10 times less damage. If you have 2 90% damage reductions, those 10 times damage reductions will then multiply together, meaning you take 100 times less damage. Now, if you were to add even 1 more 90% damage reduction layer on, you're now effectively taking 1,000 times less damage than you would initially. And Nova can stack 4 damage reductions, not 3. Let that sink in. Now granted, in the build that I will show you, my personal favorite build that I always play with, she only has 3 damage reductions, but trust me, it's more than enough. So if you guys didn't know, a couple months ago, Nova got a light rework, and I use light figuratively because this rework was massive for Nova. It made her go from a B tier Warframe to a triple S tier Warframe. I will explain every single ability one by one and tell you guys what changed and how the ability works now, because trust me, there's quite a lot to talk about. Starting with her passive. If you guys didn't know, her passive used to be terrible. Her new passive now is every enemy that is slowed will have a 15% chance to drop health orbs, and every enemy that is sped up has a 15% chance to drop energy orbs. This is a massive buff from her old passive, where when she was knocked down, she would do enough blast damage to kill an ant. It was terrible. So this is a massive W. Nullstar is probably Nova's strongest ability. Yeah, I said it. Her first ability is the strongest. Nullstar has 2 augments that make this ability so strong that you can't look past it. One is Neutron Star and one is Molecular Fission. Neutron Star does 2 things. It gives the Nullstar the ability to nuke groups of enemies, which I'll get into in a minute. And 2, it armor strips with heat. Heat is a very good armor strip. If you don't know how it works, every 0.5 seconds that heat is applied to an enemy, the enemy will have an armor strip from 15, 30, 40 to 50%. A 50% armor strip is just free. The other augment is called Molecular Fission. This primes enemies just like your ultimate would. This in itself is very overpowered because primed enemies take 100% more damage. Now when I mean 100% more damage, it's not in a similar way to how Raw works on Rhino, because Raw multiplicatively buffs all of the damage that you have on, including your mods. But needless to say, it's still very strong. Now they did something with this ability that they should have done 10 years ago, which is you can recast Nullstar. Before you couldn't recast Nullstar at all, you were just stuck with however many Nullstars you had rotating around you, which made it a quite inefficient and unreliable way to defend yourself from damage. Now you can just press it once and you can have your full damage reduction back again. Why is this so good? Well, as I mentioned, it keeps your damage reduction at 90% all the time, but also Neutron Star makes it so every time you recast this ability, all remaining null stars on Nova will go seek enemies out and hit them. Now with these two augments, Null Star can literally nuke enemies on its own. If you have the Epitaph, then it nukes high level enemies a bit easier, but even then, 1 or 2 casts and you've destroyed an entire group of Eximus Bombard units. One thing to note about Null Star, it does get an increase in damage from certain arcanes and mods. Vigorous Swap is a mod that increases the amount of damage Null Stars do, and Arcane Arachne is another buff that can be applied to the Null Stars, but Null Star right now is so strong you don't even need them. The reason Null Star can nuke so well now is because they changed the damage type from radiation to blast, and they also increased the base particle count from 6 to 12, meaning more explosions and a better damage type.
Nice.
My second ability, Antimatter Drop. Antimatter Drop now has crazy nuke potential. With the right weapon, this thing can do millions of damage from just one shot. Before, this used to be a balloon that a child would lose. It kind of just float around and not really do much. Now all you have to do is charge the ball, yeet it at an enemy, and big damage. Now there are some caveats to this. It doesn't go through walls or even a leaf. Something as small as a plant can block all of your damage. So it's important that you make sure you throw the dodgeball usually on the target or somewhere close to them where they will 100% take the damage hit. Pro tip, you can just throw this dodgeball at your friends, and when it explodes on an ally, they don't count as a obstacle, so it'll do damage all around them. Another thing to note about Antimatter Drop is they changed the damage type from radiation to blast, which is a huge W overall, because blast is an infinitely better status effect to have on an ability like this, and the damage output now is in the millions. Wormhole. It's only really useful in the open world. Other than that, it's just subsume fodder, but I would give this ability a... Now, I know I said her first ability was the strongest, however, Molecular Prime is Nova's bread and butter. On a tap cast, the enemies are slowed down, and on a hold cast, the enemies are sped up. Yep, you heard that right. With her recent changes, you don't need to build negative strength on her anymore. You can just have one build that does it all. This mass applies the damage vulnerability to all enemies on the map, and your entire team will benefit from this vulnerability, making it very useful to spam. Also, you'll slow or speed up enemies depending on how you use this ability. Depending on what you cast from this ability, meaning let's say if you do the speed cast, your null stars when they hit enemies will speed enemies up, but if you do a tap cast, then it will slow enemies down. For this ability, I would highly recommend you going into the settings for Warframes and inverting the options, so a tap is a speed up and a hold is a speed down. Just because you'll be using the speed one much more. Even if enemies are sped up, Nova just doesn't take any damage, so it's better for you to nuke maps that way. For aura mods, I would recommend using Growing Power, and for the Exilus mod slot, I'd recommend using Prime Sure-Footed. For our other mods, we will use Adaptation for our second damage reduction layer. We'll use Neutron Star and Molecular Fission for our 2 augment mods. These are very mandatory, make sure you use them. For our Prime mods, we use Prime Flow and Prime Continuity. We use one corrupted mod, which is Blind Rage. We use Augur Reach and Umbral Intensify. If you don't have Umbral Intensify, you can use the regular Intensify, or you can use Transient Fortitude. Your duration doesn't take too much of a hit, but I would recommend just using a strength mod over Transient Fortitude. For our 2 arcanes, we use Arcane Energize and Arcane Guardian. Remember, the passive allows you to get a lot of energy orbs, so you're already doing well for your energy economy all the time, but Arcane Energize just helps you that tiny bit more just to make sure that you always have energy. For Archon shards, you can honestly just use anything. Duration shards are always going to be a massive positive on this build, because they not only increase the amount of null stars you have, they will also increase the amount of range that your 4th ability will have. I would highly recommend you guys to use at least 1 casting speed shard, and if you can, make that a Tau Forged casting speed shard, because it just helps with all of the ability usage on Nova. Other than that, I have 1 health shard and 3 duration shards. The health shard I have is because her health pool is quite low, so just adding 1 Tau Forged health shard just helps to give that a bit more survivability. So how does this build work? You have 3 layers of damage reduction. 1 layer of damage reduction is from null stars, which gives you a 90%. The second layer of damage reduction is from adaptation, which gives you an additional 90%. And the third layer is from Arcane Guardian, which caps your armor out at 1000, which gives a roughly around a 78% damage reduction. On top of having all this damage reduction, you're applying blast procs as well as heat procs with Null Star, which is great for any weapon that is a status weapon, especially paired with things like Conditional Overload. Her antimatter drop is used as a nuke ability. When you see a large group of enemies all huddled up together, get your dodgeball ready, shoot it a couple times, bonk it on an enemy, and you'll see the whole room explode. Our roar ability we will have on constantly all the time, and molecular prime we keep on all the time, because the faster the enemies are, the closer they get to you, the more enemies you kill, the more explosions you'll see. Now, antimatter drop. I said that certain weapons make this ability hit very hard. The ones I would recommend are incarnate weapons, especially the Latum and the Fenmore. The reason is because these have an incarnate perk called Devouring Attrition, which boosts your non-crit hits by 2000%. And yes, antimatter drop does absorb this, and you will be doing millions of damage with it. If you don't want to use the Fenmore and the Latum, which I personally don't like anymore because I've overused them, you can use shotguns. The best shotguns for this, in my opinion, are things like the Heck, the Tigris Prime, and the new cold weapon, which I'm absolutely in love with, the Cold Bass Assist. With shotguns especially, this orb only really ever takes 1 or 2 bullets to charge up, so it's very fast and you can just throw the orb straight away. Subsume abilities are something that are heavily discussed with Nova right now. A lot of people say Nourish is the best ability to use on her. I would personally say it's actually one of the worst. Now, I know most of you are thinking, what? But yes, I just said it. Nourish is probably one of her worst options for subsume abilities. Her passive already helps us with energy, so we don't need that. And viral stacking on Nova is not needed because damage vulnerability is already given to you from her molecular prime ability. The best ability to subsume on Nova, in my opinion, is Raw. Yeah, I know, damage, but honestly, it is amazing. Pairing it with the damage vulnerability we get from molecular prime, it's a very, very powerful subsume ability to have on Nova because both of these buffs work in tandem together. If you don't want to use Raw, Pillage is another great option you can use. Its armor strips up to 70% with the build that I have, and the additional heat proc that we get from our Null Stars will take this armor reduction from 70% to 85%, leaving enemies with a very low damage reduction percentage from their armor. Zartus Whisper is great because it's great with certain weapon synergies, but I wouldn't say that it's an amazing ability to have on. I don't know all the weapon synergies, but I know that the Latum and the Fenmore are by far the best weapons you can use with Zartus Whisper. The explosions are very fun, and the build has insane nuke potential, but I just prefer Raw, and Raw is just a more versatile build to have for everyday play. Another great ability you can use, which is where her 4th layer of damage reduction comes in, is Mirage's Eclipse. Now, it's not the best, honestly, and I would say that it's completely overkill. You don't need 8000 multiplicative damage reduction, it's just completely over the top. But if you want to be absolutely unkillable, it's there for you. Nova has a very, very unique synergy with status weapons. DOT status effects are significantly stronger on Nova than other Warframes because not only can you buff DOT effects with buffs like Raw, but the damage vulnerability that you get from her molecular prime further boosts the damage of these status effects, making the DOTs deal an insane amount of damage. On top of the status effects, every enemy that you kill will explode and deal damage to the surrounding enemies. And with the recent Coda update that we just had, most of the Coda weapons are all status weapons and they all work amazingly with Nova. With Nova, you can really use any companion since she's so strong on her own. She doesn't even really need a companion. But the 2 companions I would highly recommend are Nautilus Prime with Veriglass. Now, Nautilus Prime can already nuke, but with the damage vulnerability and the raw buff that will give the Veriglass, the nuke is insane. It'll shoot an enemy, the enemy will die, and if the status effect spreads to other enemies, it's clearing maps on its own. You don't even need weapons. The second companion I would recommend you guys use is the Panzervault Profiler. The Panzervault Profiler can spread viral to all the enemies around you, which will let you build different stats on your weapons, mainly Blast and Gas. Blast and Gas on Nova are really, really good. They're great on their own anyway, but on Nova they are exponentially better. Alright, bonus builds that I have come up with. These are by no means builds for endgame. They're just fun builds that I've been messing around with, and you can try them out as well. Nova with Breach Surge is a very interesting combo. Whenever an enemy is hit, they release a radiation ball and it tracks the closest enemy to them and does damage. Priming enemies will already increase our damage output by 100%. The further armor strip we get from heat will reduce the armor by 50%. And because Null Star does AoE damage and it hits multiple enemies with just 1 star, if you have a grouping tool like Nautilus with Cordon, then you can chain the blast procs from Null Star as well as the radiation procs from Breach Surge to do a ridiculous amount of damage. Now this isn't an amazing build because it's very niche, and sometimes if the enemies are too far away from one another, it doesn't really work. But even then, it's a very, very fun build you can use, and it's just something to play if you're a bit bored of the other options. A decent amount of people were asking for this Nova guide, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing as it helps me out a lot. I am a new Warframe content creator and I would like to make more videos and actually monetize my channel. I just want to be transparent with you guys. If you could subscribe, I'd highly appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a blessed week. And until next time.
Flint and steel, chick and jockey, I am